All right, guys, so the BRRRR strategy, as we said before, you buy it, you rehab it, refinance it, and you repeat it. So as I'm kind of explaining things to Chris, I think the reason why a lot of people like it is because, well, one of the main questions that I personally get when I travel a lot is like, Daniel, how do I get started? I think, like, would you say the same thing for a lot of entrepreneurs? Like, they just kind of don't know what to do.
Yeah, and when's the time to get started? When's the right market?
Right, exactly. So, a lot of people think that real estate strategies, especially like one, will last all throughout the years of an economic cycle. Because every time is different, right? When I say economic cycle, I mean the good times, the bad times, the kind of in the transition periods. And one of the reasons why I'm not a big fan of the BRRRR strategy right now is because, well, we have this little thing called interest rate. Do you know what an interest rate is, right?
Absolutely.
So interest rate basically is when the Federal Reserve, and this is kind of getting into the basics of monetary policy, is when the they raise the interest rate, and then their relationship with the bank then affects our business that we do with the central banking system. So obviously a lot of investors, they go out and they finance the buildings based on their relationship with like a bank, right? Or like a credit union. So what happens is that, well, the higher that interest rate gets, well, guess what it does to our central banking system? It basically makes the money more expensive. So, Chris, as you would probably guess, what do you think happens when the federal interest rates raise their money? What do you think the banks will do to us?
They're going to increase it.
They're going to increase it, absolutely. And for those of you guys that are watching, you guys would absolutely agree, because that's, again, how banks make their money. They have that little spread. So you guys are probably thinking right now, okay, so we raise the money, right? We raise the interest rate on the money, how expensive the money is. Well, that's going to create what? It's going to create less competition. It means less people at the table, people making lots of lower offers. So the higher that interest rate gets, well, the lower the value a lot of these properties are going to be at. And when we're talking about the BRRRR strategy, the refinance is probably the most important part. Well, who do we refinance from? The bank, right? So imagine if you have a scenario where, in all reality, in the last 2 years, guys, in 2017, 2018, the interest rates have been going up slowly but surely. And it's going to happen again in 2019, where a lot of people are saying there's going to be another recession, right? So when you're in an economic cycle where the rates are getting higher and higher and higher, my first point that I want to make as to why I don't think the BRRRR strategy works right now is because, well, you're basically doing that strategy, right? You're basically doing that strategy in a time where the money gets more and more and more expensive. What does that mean? It means the value gets lower and lower and lower. And when the value gets lower and lower and lower, guess what happens to the amount you can refinance? Not a great thing that's going on right there. Not a great situation. So do I love the strategy? Yes. So before we move on, why don't we talk about some positives, right, to the BRRRR strategy? But before we go, do you have any questions so far?
Yeah, so we're talking about interest rates going up. Do you feel like the recession is a possibility in the coming years?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I definitely don't want to get too much into it in this video, but Chris actually brought up a really, really, really good point, because it's actually one of the most popular topics that is being talked about right now. And maybe that's the next video. Let us know in the comments below. But one of the main reasons as to why I could really point out to a recession coming really soon is Treasury bonds. So let's take a little, side road here. What Treasury bonds are is that's what happens when an economy wants to bounce back. They want to pump liquid back into the economy. And obviously, tell us what happened in 08.
Got too pumped in.
We got too pumped in. Exactly. That's what happened, right? So in 2008, they started doing this thing called global quantitative easing, where they actually started issuing what's called treasury bonds, treasury notes, to not only domestic buyers, but a lot of international buyers, to pump liquid back into the economy, right? Because it was a recession. A lot of people lost a lot of money, right? The government was scrambling to pump money back into the system. So in 2008, 2009, but mainly in 2010, they started issuing a lot of these bonds and notes. Well, a 10-year treasury bond, if they issue it in 2010, guess when it's due? In 2020, right? Because 2010 plus 10 years is 2020. And the problem is that they issued it out at a very low interest rate. Now it's at close to 4%. So if you're talking about, and I don't know what the total amount is, but I can tell you in the last 10 years, the United States has paid probably over $3.4 trillion just on the interest of the loan. right? So that's the scenario where we're headed, guys. And going back to the BRRRR strategy, again, you're relying on what you're doing is when you're buying it, you're rehabbing it to build what's called equity, right? That's what we do. When we rehab something, right, we buy a house for $50,000, we put $25,000 into it, and then the ARV is $110,000. We have that equity. That's $35,000 between our buying it, rehabbing it into $110,000. That's the difference right there is what we have in terms of equity. Now, the BRRRR strategy is reliant on after the rehab, you refinance $75,000 or $85,000 depending on how much you want to give to your investor, right? So follow me here, guys. So you're buying a property for $50,000. You put $25,000 into the rehab. Let's say your investor wants, whatever amount return, so you end up refinancing $85,000. If we're doing the math here, right? So we got 110 minus 85,000. Where are we left with? About 25,000, right? Just about. Now here's where we run to another problem, right? And in a rising rate market, which is where we're at right now, here's where we have the biggest problem. Not only do the interest rates go up a little bit, but banks have this thing called reserve requirement, right? The reserve requirement is what they are required by the law, right? By regulations through the Federal Reserve to have in their bank, right? But now the problem is as banks want to mitigate more risk, right? Because banks are in the business of risk assessment. Would you agree?
I would agree.
Absolutely. So, as they're in the business of risk assessment, they want certain amount of investors to have equity before they start their loan. So I'll even give you a quick example real quick. So I remember myself, my partner, and one of my investors, we actually went to the bank and we wanted to finance a 43-unit apartment complex. And, my net worth is up there, and my partner's net worth was definitely there. And our investor had probably the biggest net worth out of all three of us. Like, I think his net worth was probably in like the 8-9 figure region. And even when we went to the bank, being experienced investors and having a very high liquidity and net worth, they made us put 25% down, when typically the commercial loan was only 20% down. So if we're looking at that scenario, going back to the 110, if you're wanting to refinance $85,000 out of the property and you're left with only $25,000, well, that doesn't put you at the 25% down mark. They're going to have to basically ask you to come up with the rest, right? And that's a pretty good example. That's a really, really good example of what can happen. So do you have any questions so far?
So you talked a lot about equity. And
Yeah.
for those people who are just watching this for the first time, do we have a video or something that explains more in depth what equity exactly is on a property once you purchase it?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's definitely comment down below, guys. If that's another video you guys want us to make, we're here, Chris and I, to give you guys as much value as possible. So I know we have a couple videos that kind of refer to it in our Kwak Brothers channel, but if you actually want a formal video talking about what equity is, I can absolutely do that. But long story short, the textbook definition of equity is basically a person's financial interest in a particular property. So the reason why banks look at equity so much is because that basically tells you how much of this property does this person have paid off, right? And the more equity that they strip, well, the more riskier it gets for the bank. Because number one, they're loaning out more money, right? And point number two, the more money that they loan out, the more risk there's involved with the actual investor, because they don't know if this investor is smart enough to cash flow it, to maintain it really well, to manage it really well. And another issue that the banks also have with equity is this little thing called value of collateral, right? When the value of the collateral starts becoming lower than the cost of the actual loan itself, the banks start becoming a little bit worried, right? Because what happens if the investor gets in a bit of a struggle and they have to sell? Well, they won't be able to pay back the full amount of the loan. Right. Does that kind of answer your question a little bit?
No, it does. And I think that once you have an established foundation of what equity is and understanding why the banks are doing what they're doing, the BRRRR setup kind of makes more sense of why it doesn't work in every market.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in a rising rate market, the BRRRR strategy, it's really hard to make it work because I always tell a lot of the investors that ask me about the BRRRR strategy, which I actually didn't even know about the strategy until like 2 years ago. But I mean, apparently it's like super duper popular. And guys, like Chris and I aren't here to shut it down, right? Would you agree with me when I say that?
Because it does have a time where it works.
Yes, it does. And we're actually going to talk about that here in a little bit. But I think I could speak for myself and also you, Chris, when we say we don't ever celebrate the demise of an investor, right? Or an entrepreneur. We really want everybody to succeed. Otherwise, we wouldn't, be making these videos with all these awesome equipment, But let's talk about it when it does work. Let's talk about when the BRRRR strategy really works. If I were to put the success of the BRRRR strategy in the right economical context, look at what the economy was doing in 2012. And when I say economy, I also mean the housing market. If you look at what the housing market was doing in 2012, 2013, 2014, what it was doing, it was just starting to come back, right? It was starting to come back a little bit more and a little bit more. We really had about 4 years that the recession lasted between 2008 and 2012. But in 2012, the economy started coming back. Now, when the economy starts coming back and money gets cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and people start coming out of the woodworks to invest, that's when you want to do the BRRRR strategy. Because keep in mind, guys, the more people that are coming back, the more people that are being told from the media that the economy is coming back, we're doing good, start investing again. And a lot of people hear that from their financial advisor. That's when you want to start doing the BRRRR strategy. Because the BRRRR strategy, and this is probably the most important point out of the entire video, is that the BRRRR strategy is completely dependent on the spread of equity between when you buy it, rehab it, and then when you refinance. If you have a very thick margin right there, yes, the BRRRR strategy absolutely works, because not only do you have enough to refinance and give your investor an awesome return so you can do it again, but you also have enough equity to the point where when you do refinance, the bank is, number one, going to let you refinance. Because I think that's one thing that not a lot of people talk about, is whether the bank is going to allow a refinance or not. Or number two, if you're going to get good terms on that refinance, because remember, you are going to be holding on to that property. And you do want good interest rates. You do want good loan terms. And number three, whether or not you have enough safety to safely manage and mitigate that risk as you hold on to that property. Does that kind of make sense?
It does.
So those three things. So if you look at 2012, 13, 14, the reason why I really believe that was the perfect time to do the BRRRR strategies, because, well, when you have a lot of people re-entering the market, what does that create? Creates competition, right? Now, if you have 15 people bidding on a house, what are you going to have? You're going to have competition. Prices are going to go up compared to when 5 people are going to, bid on a house. I remember I knew I had to get out of the multifamily market because I know apartment complexes is like really popular on YouTube when it comes to like real estate investing. I don't know, maybe it's because like people have like big egos and they just want like the bigger buildings. But I remember it was time for me to leave the apartment complex market when the last apartment building I bought, it was a 24-unit building, and we had 15 other offers we had to compete against. 15 other offers we had to compete against. And I knew like that was my cue to leave. And that was like 2017, right? Like I knew that was my cue to leave. I was like, wow, okay, like I was trying to prolong this a little bit more. But when people start coming out of the woodworks and they start investing again, which is what 2012, 13, 14, that was happening, then all of a sudden the market is appreciating the property for you, right? When the market appreciates the property for you, all of a sudden you have that wide range of equity that you're able to take advantage of. You may be able to refinance enough to even put some money in your own pocket, right? That's when the BRRRR strategy is really, really effective. But, I say this out of experience of I had the fortune and the blessing to be able to travel across the country and teach thousands of real estate investors. And a lot of times I'll kind of see them and they'll see me and they're like, oh, this young guy, you know what I mean? And they'll come up to me and for some reason, like, and you probably get this too with other entrepreneurs that are older. Sure. They're like, oh, dude, when I was your age, like I had this, I had that, right? And I would have time and time again, every city I went to, whether it was LA, whether it was Seattle, whether it was Miami, which was my favorite city to train in, and then like whether it was Washington, wherever these cities I went, I would always have at least one person who says, man, I remember in 2007, I had 30 houses. And I was like, what happened? And it was always one of two things. Number one, the bank called my note, right? Because I over leveraged myself. Or number two, it was the fact that I couldn't provide enough liquidity to keep my financial notes going. Because not a lot of people understand that once that level gets lower than what the actual collateral value is, a lot of times the banks will ask for that amount of liquidity to even continue their note. Or otherwise they say, Oh, another popular one is like, oh yeah, my balloon was up due and I couldn't refinance because of the shape of the economy. Right? Like, do you remember how many banks like shut down in 2008? Like, banks are going out of business left and right.
Yeah.
Right. So that means that every single one of those banks that went out of business, all the loans that they were holding, well, guess what?
Public.
Yeah, it's done, right?
Yeah.
Pop that bubble.
Yeah.
So, do you have any questions so far, Chris, in terms of anything that I talked about?
Yeah, I mean, we said that it works at a certain time period.
Yeah.
Like, how long would you say that time period is that the BRRRR strategy actually works?
Yeah, so when you want to do the BRRRR strategy, you definitely want to have enough time, right? So for the last 7 years, so we're in 2019 right now. For the last 7 years, the economy has really kind of been on an upscale. You know, like interest rates have been doing great, right? It was at zero for the longest time during the Obama administration years. But I say if you want to do it the right way and really do it the safe way, for me, the best time would be to do it in like 2012, 13, 14. So maybe about a window of about 3 to 4 years, because you want 3, 4 years of economic prosperity and upswing after that to really make sure that your value stays relevant, it stays good. But at the same time, you're not putting yourself in a situation to where, you know, you're getting a 3-year balloon or a 4-year balloon. I say if you're going to do it, you know, play it safe and get a 7, 8-year balloon. So that way you're giving yourself enough time to build yourself a good, strong equity position, right? I'm not even saying don't do it. You know what I mean? Like, it's a good strategy, guys. I'm not here to bash it, right? I'm not here to create some diss track with Chris, you know what I mean, about the BRRRR strategy. That's not what I'm here to do. I'm just making sure that you guys are all aware on what this strategy is so you guys can make wise decisions. But I'd say about a good 3 to 4 years is a good window to where I feel like the BRRRR strategy really, really works. You know, but as for me, like, I'm not buying any apartment complexes right now. I don't think the BRRRR strategy is something I want to do personally right now at this moment. Yeah, and probably not for another 5, 6 years.
If I'm not familiar with the BRRRR strategy just as a whole, like, where can I find out more about it?
Yeah, so obviously a simple Google search, but here's the best way I would ask, or I would have people find out about any real estate strategy. Find one person who's really good at doing that thing, and then pick their brain. I remember when I first started out my career, I had about 5 or 6 different people I would shadow. And like one guy was an expert in fix and flip, like he had like 15 going on at the same time. One guy was my expert in like buy and hold with single families. One guy with apartment complexes, another guy with Airbnb, right? So I would literally shadow each different guy. You know, like I would literally say Mondays are my, like this guy, you know, Tuesdays that guy, Wednesdays that, you know what I mean? And I would literally just shadow them. So with any strategy, including the BRRRR strategy, I would find somebody who actually has done it and can tell you like their successes, their failures. But I will say this, and this is just my observation, guys. Just my observation. Nothing's opinionated here. This is just based on what I observe. Because my brother Sam and I, obviously, we admin a lot of pretty large Facebook groups when it comes to real estate investing. We've got this channel, and I spend most of my time on stage, kind of training and helping people. And out of all the people that I've met who have done the BRRRR strategy in the past, 90% of them have lost everything. 90%. I remember I met one dude with 300 houses, and he did the BRRRR strategy with 300 houses. And he ended up owing the bank about like $22.5 million just to keep all those 300 houses. And then he defaulted, and then he ran away to Mexico or something like that.
And did he have a mentor, someone he was learning from?
No. No, he didn't. But you know what? Like example. It's an example of what not to do. And this guy was he was a smart guy, and he was in his late 30s. And I'm obviously not going to disclose the name of this individual, but I meet a lot of people who did it with 10 houses, 15 houses. And, just my observation, guys, 90% of them that I've met it didn't work out. It didn't work out.
So you seem like you have a lot of knowledge in all the different areas from all these different mentors that you've had.
Yeah.
As being a coach, are you willing to teach your audience one-on-one coaching in these different strategies?
Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite ways to actually distribute content and value is obviously through our YouTube channel. But I also enjoy watching the progress of people who I get to personally coach one-on-one. It's hard for me. Like I always tell the people, like my clients, I always tell them, like, when we start, hold on. Because I like to move at 200 miles per hour. And a lot of times they have to kind of just stop me and say, wait, explain that. But in my world, that's just the best way to learn. The best way to learn is to play at the highest level, you know, at literally the first time around, and you know, be used to that, and grow up in that. And because, you know, my theory and philosophy is make your practice so intense that the game is easy. You know, like when I study a lot of successful people, like Michael Jordan had that mentality, right? Like Michael Jordan's teammates were notorious for saying, oh, the games were so easy because of how intense our practice was.
And thinking back, they had a coach like Tim Grover for Michael Jordan. He pushed him farther than he was willing to go to be pushed. So having a coach in any area, it makes a lot of sense.
I would almost say it's necessary for success. Like if you want to be successful, you have to be, like, you just have to have a coach. You have to have somebody who's willing to push you beyond your comfort zone. Because one of my favorite quotes in life is by Thomas Edison. He actually said, to have what you've never had, you've got to learn what you've never learned, say what you've never said, and most importantly, you've got to be who you've never been. Like, that's one of my favorite quotes that stuck with me. So even when we're scaling in our real estate business, and, you know, like how we want to treat our investors, because I treat my investors like they're family. Like, I always put my investors first. You know, people who actually put their dollars and cents into my businesses for us to go out and check out properties and look at properties and purchase properties. Like, I think I was just telling you yesterday, I looked at 1,300 deals in 2018. Over 1,300 deals in 2018, and I only closed and moved on 8 of them. Like, that's how protective I am of my investors.
It sounds like you have to put a lot of time and energy when you're doing this stuff. So is this something that you can do, this strategy, being like part-time with a full-time job?
Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite things to help people out is helping people become financially free. My girlfriend actually works a full-time job right now, but she actually is just right about to leave her job because she just bought a 4-unit and she's actually starting her own design company. So she's actually about to walk away from her job pretty soon. So that's one of the things that make me the most happy. Like, I always see that as like this right here, I see as my legacy. You know, being on stage, and because like my name may not live forever, but I know the content and the value that I give for basically free 99% of the time is gonna be my legacy.
Awesome.
Yeah, man. Any final questions?
You covered a lot.
All right. Well, hopefully that helped out, guys. Glad you enjoyed this video with myself and Chris. You're gonna be seeing a lot more of Chris in our videos as well, because he's really somebody that I want to take under my wing and help out. But I hope this video was valuable to you guys. I'll see you guys in the next one. Comment down below if you want us to cover any more topics. Hey guys, this is Daniel.
And this is Sam.
We are the Kwak Brothers. I hope you guys enjoyed that video. If you want to see more content value that we put out like this, what should they do, Sam?
Go ahead and hit the subscribe button and also hit the bell icon so you guys get notification for our upcoming videos.
That's right.